We're continuing to track one of the top stories this morning, that explosive court report released just yesterday about the downfall of Lehman and perhaps the role of J.P. Morgan and Citigroup in ushering in the death of that financial firm. We are digging into this report. There's a lot to chew on here. We're bringing in Charlie Peabody of Portales Partners. He's one of the most accurate analysts who covers the banks, according to our internal Bloomberg rankings. And I do want to get your take here on what we have learned overnight. Let's run through the last few days, the last few moments of life of Lehman. We know on September the 9th, J.P. Morgan demanded $5 billion more in collateral on September the 9th in order to secure its clearing arrangements. The next day, Lehman put up $3 billion in securities, another $3 billion in cash and money market funds, just as they report their earnings. The next day, September the 11th, J.P. Morgan says we need another $5 billion in cash collateral. Lehman ponied up, but they didn't ask for a return of the collateral they posted a few days previous to that. And then we get the 15th. Quick death here, Lehman filing for bankruptcy. You run through those last few days and tell me, is it unusual to see demands like that from J.P. Morgan and from Citi on the last few days of life here?
Well, it's not unusual for counterparties to make those demands. And if you look back at history, large bank failures usually occur because of a liquidity crisis, not because of a capital insolvency. And so counterparties do play a very decisive role at the very end of the life of a firm. In fact, if you go back to the 90-91 commercial real estate debacle, where we had some large bank failures like Bank of New England and Southeast Banking Corp, the Fed played the role of counterparty with respect to liquidity. Both those banks were into the Fed discount window borrowings in a big way, and at some point the Fed said we need more collateral. They couldn't put it up, and so they failed. That's
so is it fair to say then that J.P. Morgan and Citi basically contributed to the collapse, that they helped bring about the collapse of Lehman? Is that fair?
Yeah, but they weren't the only counterparties. Everyone was haircutting collateral at that time because we had deflating values in real estate. They happened to be the bigger counterparties and therefore played a decisive role.
Now, we also know from this report, the blame is also spread back internally at the executive ranks within Lehman Brothers. Dick Fuld himself, the CEO of the company, is labeled grossly negligent by this U.S. trustee examiner who, went through and spent a lot of money putting together this over 2,000-page report. But he also blames here the people looking over the books. Ernst & Young says that they could be accused of professional malpractice for allowing some of the accounting mechanisms to have been used here. In particular, the focus in on repos and how Lehman used them. You're an analyst. How much did you dig into? How much did your colleagues dig into the use of repos on their balance sheet?
Well, we didn't know anything about the 105 repos or the 108 repo transactions. And a lot of the comments that management made to the analyst community on their calls were misleading about what was going on with the balance sheet.
Never any mention of this.
No, not that I recall. But I will say, counterparties rely on confidence in your accounting practices. And the only way you can have a liquidity crisis is if you lose that confidence in the marketplace, particularly when you're wholesale funded. And we all had suspicions about whether Lehman was marking its balance sheet on the asset side properly. And I wrote 2 reports on September 11th and 12th where I questioned their ability to survive as an independent entity. So the analyst community was questioning their survivability at that point.
There's a step between, though, questioning whether what they're doing is quite accurate and whether it has been suggested professional malpractice.
Well,
what was the whisper? What were those days like when you were trying to get this kind of information?
Well, those days were passionate and frustrating at the same time because there was a lot of emotions, and I think that affects counterparties and their confidence levels. But we weren't getting straight answers on the calls from management at that particular point in time.
Anything in here that changes the landscape for you now?
No, I think it's a repeat of history. The only difference this time around is you had a non-bank entity which couldn't borrow from the Fed to, tide itself over, and you didn't have TALF, these emergency liquidity programs. You didn't have TARP, so they really were dependent upon the confidence in the marketplace, and they lost that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Such an interesting report to comb through, look at history. Thank you so much, Charles Peabody.